Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another season preview video. In today's video, we're looking at the Washington Capitals and the Carolina Hurricanes. Two teams who made the playoffs last year, who faced in the second round, and who eventually were eliminated in the second round of the conference final. We'll touch on how they did last year, how they did this offseason, and look ahead to their predictions for 2025-2026 season. So touch on all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we begin this video, do not forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. Now in today's video, as per usual, we've got a season preview video here. We're talking about the Washington Capitals and the Carolina Hurricanes. So once again, last year was a pretty solid season for both these teams. The Capitals wound up making the playoffs, winning the Metro Division. Canes were second. So look at how these two teams did last year. Look at their additions and subtractions, the trades they made in the offseason, their top 3 picks in the 2025 draft, my off-season previews checklist, see what they accomplished from that. We're also looking at my projected lineup for these two teams. We're looking at my predictions for the 25-26 season for these two teams, and we'll also look at the off-season grade. So we'll start with the Washington Capitals. Like I said last year, fantastic season. Really exceeded my expectations for this Caps team. They had a 51-22-9 record for 111 points. First in the Metro, first in the Eastern Conference, second in the entire NHL. Like, they were a behemoth of a team to take down last year. Really solid, fantastic season. Lots of things went right for the Caps. They scored 286 goals for and had 229 goals against. So they were a plus 57. Once again, not one of the best we've seen, but it was a pretty gosh dang good plus-minus total there for the Washington Capitals. Goal scoring and point scoring rise in the postseason. Dylan Strome led the team with 82 points, followed by Ovechkin, who had 73, and then Pierre-Luc Dubois and Alexis Protas, who both had 66. While Ovechkin led the team with 44 goals, breaking Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal record. Tom Wilson had 33 goals, and Alexis Protas had 30. So once again, multiple players had 30-plus goals, 2+ players had 70-plus points. Really solid stuff there from the Caps. Like, they were a dominant team all season long. Had 140+ point score, 180+ point score. Like, that's all you really want from a team. They wound up making the playoffs as the best team in the Eastern Conference. Played the Montreal Canadiens, who were the second wildcard team in the Eastern Conference. They took them down. The Montreal Canadiens lost to the Washington Capitals in round 1 in 5 games, setting up the Caps taking on the Canes in round 2, and that's where the Caps' magic ended. They really didn't do overly well against the Canes, got really ran over, and they lost in 5 games to Carolina. So after being Montreal in 5 games in round 1, they lose to Carolina in 5 games in round 2. So once again, a little bit of a sour end to the season, but at least they were able to get their first series win in what, like it was 6 or 7 years. So good stuff there from Washington. Dylan Strome led the team with 11 points, followed by Tom Wilson, who had 7. Ovechkin led the team with 5 goals, followed by Connor McMichael, who had 4. So once again, not bad point totals in the playoffs either. It just wasn't enough to get past the Carolina Hurricanes. So very interesting note there. Those are all their stats from last year. Next, going over to their offseason additions and subtractions. So with their addition side, they had Sheldon Rempel from Vegas, Sourdif from Florida in a trade, Chisholm from Minnesota in a trade, Belpedio, Rosen from Colorado, and a 2025 6th runner that originally belonged to Minnesota. They lost Andrew Mangiapane to Edmonton, Taylor Raddysh to the Rangers, Lars Eller to Ottawa, Michael Scarbosa to UFA status, Ethan Bear to New York I, Chase Prisky to Minnesota in the Chisholm deal. They lost Alex Alexiev to Pittsburgh in free agency. They lost Mitchell Gibson to UFA status. And then they also lost a 2025 4th, 2026 2nd, and 2027 6th round pick, all the Washington Capitals. So those are some very interesting moves there from the Capitals. If you look at this team, they lose a little bit of goalie depth in Mitchell Gibson, but it's not an overly bad loss on the goaltending side. They lose Alex Alexiev, Chase Prisky, and Ethan Bear on the defensive side, but they add Chisholm, Belpedio, and Rosen. I think Chisholm really outweighs any of the losses on the blue line. I do think that Belpedio and Rosen can be call-up options, so not bad movement there on the defensive end. The real blow is on the forward side this past offseason. They add Rempel, they add Sourdif. Those guys have mostly been AHL players over the past while, can maybe be spares or fourth liners. They lose Mangiapane, who was a solid top 9 guy, Raddysh, who was a solid bottom 6 guy, Eller, who was a really solid fourth line center, and Scarbosa, who was a really solid call-up option. So offensively, definitely took a step back, and they lost a little bit of draft capital. They swapped 6th round picks a couple of years apart, but they also lost a 2nd and a 4th round pick. So once again, it wasn't the best offseason in the world, maybe not the worst either, but still very interesting additions and subtractions when it comes to the Washington Capitals. The Caps made 2 trades this offseason. They acquired Ehlers and Chisholm and a 2025 6th rounder from Minnesota from the Wild in exchange for Chase Prisky and a 2025 4th rounder. And then they traded the 2026 2nd and 2027 6th round pick to the Florida Panthers for Justin Sourdif in a deal that I really think is extremely puzzling, given Sourdif's been an AHL player for the majority of his career. So once again, some very interesting and frankly befuddling deals on the Washington Capitals side. The Caps had top 3 draft picks in the 2025 draft were as follows. They had a 1st round pick, 27th overall, and took left winger Lakovic. They had a 2nd round pick, 37th overall, and they took center prospect Gastrin. And they had a 3rd round pick, 96 overall, and took left winger Schaefer. So they definitely targeted 4 prospects in this year's draft. Lakovic, a really solid pickup here at 27th, really fell into their laps. I do think Gastrin in the long run could really be a solid 3rd, 4th line center for the Caps. And Schaefer, I think, could be a really solid bottom 6 forward when all said and done for his career. So very interesting note there. Like I said, no guarantees by any means that any of these guys are going to be able to make the NHL roster this year or next year. But I think in due time, all of them could be really solid forward additions for the Capitals. So very interesting draft picks there from the Washington Capitals. Next, going over to my offseason checklist from my offseason preview video. So back in my offseason preview video, I did mention 5 things I said the Capitals should do in the offseason to get better and improve for this upcoming season. So the first thing I said the team should do was to consider moving guys like Trevor Van Riemsdyk or Martin Ferravari. It was purely to free up cap space because the Caps didn't have a whole bunch of cap space. So I was hoping that they would be able to free up some cap space. The easiest targets, in my opinion, were Trevor Van Riemsdyk or Martin Ferravari. They did not move either of them. They gave Martin Ferravari a long-term extension, and Trevor Van Riemsdyk is still entering the final year of his deal signed with the Washington Capitals. So as much as I thought that they would probably try and move off of one or both of those 2 defensemen, they didn't do that, so that's an X on my checklist. The second thing I said was to add some bottom 6 help. To some extent, I guess you could say they did that. Like, it really does depend on your view of Rempel and Sourdif. Are the AHL guys? If so, Caps really didn't add any bottom 6 help, but if you really do view them as like 4th line guys, maybe spare guys, maybe I think you could say to some extent they add some bottom 6 help. So it really does depend on your view of Rempel and Sourdif, but I think it's more towards the extent of didn't really add a whole bunch of bottom 6 help. The third thing I said on my offseason checklist was to add a solid top 6 forward. They didn't do that. I mean, I really was hoping that they would add a solid top 6 forward to A, replace the loss of Andre Mangiapane, but to B, add someone who can play with, maybe even take over Alex Ovechkin as he's nearing the end of his career. It's not like they were in on Nikolai Ehlers, maybe to some extent Mitch Marner, but they weren't able to acquire either one of those guys in free agency. They didn't go after anyone in the trade market, so that's really all that is for the Washington Capitals. They didn't add a top 6 forward, so that's an X on my checklist. The fourth thing I said this team should do is to give younger guys opportunities, such as Suzulev, Chesley, Kristel, and Miroshnichenko. Those are the guys I mentioned in my offseason preview video. I think some of those guys will have some shots. I wouldn't be surprised if guys like Kristal, Lapierre, Miroshnichenko got opportunities on the offensive side. Chesley, I do think, could have a shot on the defensive side. So I definitely do think there's a couple of options there, but I do think the Caps do have a couple of spots open for some of the younger players, so I'm going to give that a check to some extent. And the fifth thing I said this team should do is to add some defensive depth. They did that. Chisholm, I think, is going to be a really solid third pair, 6'7" defenseman for the Washington Capitals for this upcoming season and beyond. And I do think Belpedio and Rosen can both be AHL call-up options. So I do think they added some solid depth on the defensive end. So definitely they improved on two things that I said that they should really improve on this offseason, but they didn't improve on three things, including adding a solid top 6 forward to play with Ovechkin. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my projected lineup for the Washington Capitals for 2025-2026 season. So as it sits right now, my current lineup for the Washington Capitals is as follows. I have Alex Ovechkin playing on the top unit with Dylan Strome and Tom Wilson. I have Protas, Dubois, and Leonard on the second line. I have Miroshnichenko with McMichael and Bouvillier on the third line. Dume with Dowd and Sourdif on the fourth line. I have Sandin and Carlson being the first pair, Chikrin and Roy being the second pair, and Chisholm and Ferravari being the third pair. I have Thompson being the starter, Linger in the backup, and then Lapierre, Milano, and Trevor Van Riemsdyk being the three spares. And that would be a decent roster. Like, Forward group wise, it's not the deepest in the world, but it's not an overly bad one. Defensive wise, they're a pretty dang good team on paper defensively, and they've got one of the best tandems in net in Thompson and Lindgren. So in all, not a bad lineup there for the Washington Capitals. Now, if you go over to my predictions for the Washington Capitals for a 2025-2026 season, I think they're going to take a step back. Not a horrible step back. Well, I guess you could say horrible step back. I think they're going to have a 20-plus point step back. I think they're going to hang around for the playoffs. I don't think they're going to be a runaway dominant team in the Metro Division again. I think that was a one-off last year. I think they'll go back to being a team who competes for a playoff spot, who I could easily see making it as a wildcard team, maybe one of the lower spots in the Metro side. But I can't see at this point in time, with the offseason they had and the offseason some of these other teams have had, the Capitals completely 100% making a playoff spot. So I have them finishing with a record of 40, 32, and 10 for 90 points, finishing, 3 or 4 points out of a playoff spot. I think they're going to be extremely close, and like I said, it would not be one bit surprised if they snuck into a wildcard spot. I just don't think they're going to have as good of a season as they did last year, being the second best team in the entire NHL. I think they're poised for a step back. I think long term, this team does have a bright future. I just don't think they did enough this offseason to keep up with some of the other teams that had some better offseasons. So at this current point in time, I have the Caps being the 10th team in the Eastern Conference, finishing with 90 points, just a couple out of a playoff spot. And lastly, going over to my offseason grade. So if you look at this team, like I said, defensive wise, not too much change. There's a little bit of depth in net. They lost definitely some draft capital, and the forward group is definitely a lot weaker than it was last year. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to give them a D rating on the off-season grades. I don't think they had a great off-season. I don't think it was one of the worst we've seen, but I can't see with them losing Mangiapane, Radish, and Eller, replacing them with Sourdif and Rempel. It really doesn't make a whole bunch of sense. And they also lost a whole bunch of draft capital. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to give them a D rating, and I think that's warranted with their offseason that they just had. So very interesting note there. And next, going over to the Carolina Hurricanes. So going over to the Carolina Hurricanes, they had a pretty solid season last year too. Now, they did not hit the triple-digit mark, which is something they had done the past couple of seasons, but they had a pretty solid season last year. They finished with a record of 47, 30, and 5 for 99 points. That was good enough for second in the Metro, fourth in the entire Eastern Conference, and 10th in the entire NHL. So once again, it's not one of the best seasons we've seen. They didn't even hit the triple-digit mark, but they got 99 points, so they got one more point. They would have hit the triple-digit mark. They were the second best team in the Metro Division, so they had a pretty solid season last year. They wound up having 266 goals for in the regular season, 230 goals against. So once again, it's not as good of a plus-minus as the Caps or some of these other teams have had, but a plus 36 rating is nothing to scoff at. It was a pretty solid plus-minus category for the Carolina Hurricanes, so I think they should be pretty proud about that. Goal and point scoring leaders in the regular season, Aho led the team with 74 points in the regular season, followed by Jarvis with 67 and Svechnikov with 48, while Jarvis led the team with 32 goals in the regular season, followed by Aho, who had 29, and Roslovic, who had 22. So once again, Jarvis, Aho, to some extent Svechnikov were the point drivers on this team. Only one guy hit 30 goals, only one guy hit 70 plus points, so you can see they weren't one of the best teams goal scoring wise, but they definitely had a lot of really solid spread out goal scoring. So even though they weren't one of the best goal scoring teams, pretty solid there for the Canes. They wound up being the Devils in 5 games in round 1. After being the second team in the Metro, they got the Devils, who are a big team, in the third spot in the Metro, and they took care of business. Then they beat the Washington Capitals in 5 games, as we just talked about. Really handled them quite well before they wound up finally getting to the Eastern Conference Final, finally winning an Eastern Conference Final game, but they did wind up losing in 5 games to the Florida Panthers. So once again, even though they were able to get to the Eastern Conference Final, I think it's the third time in the last 5, 6, 7 years that the Canes have been able to get to the conference final. It was not enough to get them past the conference final to the Stanley Cup final, so very interesting note there. In the postseason, Jarvis led the team with 16 points, followed by Aho, who had 15. Svechnikov led the team with 8 goals, followed by Aho, who had 7. So once again, Aho, Jarvis, Svechnikov, point drivers in the postseason. But once again, the offense, the defense didn't really go well in the conference final against Florida. Big reason as to why they wound up losing in that conference final, so very interesting note there. Next, going over to their offseason additions and subtractions. Now, if you look at the additions and subtractions for the Carolina Hurricanes, it's not a long list here. They add Nikolai Ehlers from Winnipeg in free agency, Ehlers Miller in a trade from the Rangers, Mike Riley from the Islanders, Gavin Bayreuther as a UFA, both in free agency, and they also got Caden Primo from Montreal in a trade. Meanwhile, well, they lose Jack Roslovic, who's a UFA, Brent Burns to Colorado, Orlov to San Jose, Stillman to Edmonton, Morrow to NYR, Smith, Peretz, Martin all to UFA status, and then a 2026 first rounder of Dallas's, a 2026 second rounder of Carolina's, and a 2026 seventh rounder of Carolina. So they lose some draft capital. Goaltending wise, if you look at the team, they lose Martin, who was a pretty solid third stringer last year. Perez, who was a decent fourth, fifth stringer, who was on the younger side of things. They add Primo. Primo's not really solid backup at this point at the NHL level, but he can definitely be a solid third stringer behind guys like Kochetkov and Anderson this upcoming season. So once again, in net, it's not an overly bad swap, losing Martin and Perez and getting Primo. Defensively, they lose Stillman, Orlov, Burns, Smith, and Morrow. Stillman, Smith were both AHL level guys. Morrow started to get into the NHL level this past year. Burns was a really solid top 4 defenseman, and Orlov a solid top 6 defenseman. So you lose all of those guys. They get Keandre Miller, who's going to be a really solid top 4 defenseman. Got him in a trade from the Rangers. They got Mike Rowley, who can be a solid 6-7 defenseman from the Islanders, and they got Gavin Brayerthur, who can be a call-up option. So all in all, they do lose a little bit of depth and a little bit of youth on the defensive end, but I think Keandre Miller and Mike Rowley are definitely going to be able to offset losses of guys like Orlov, Burns, and Morrow. So very interesting note there. They lose Jack Roslovic, but they get Nikolai Ehlers on the forward group. Like, that was a really solid pickup to get Ehlers. Like, I know Roslovic was one of the top goal scorers in the regular season for the Hurricanes. Ehlers is going to be a fantastic top 6 piece for the Hurricanes, and I think definitely outweighs the loss of Roslovic. I know they lose some draft capital as well, so I like the off-season moves from the Carolina Hurricanes that they made. So very interesting note there. The Hurricanes also had 2 trades this past off-season. They wound up acquiring Keandre Miller from the Rangers for Scott Morrow, Dallas' 2026 first and Carolina's 2026 second round pick, and they traded the 2026 seventh round pick of their own to Montreal for Caden Primo. So a couple of very intriguing deals, adding a goaltender and a defenseman. Next, going over to the top 3 draft picks for the Carolina Hurricanes for a 2025 draft. So they had 3 second round picks as their first 3 picks in the 2025 draft. They had the 41st overall pick, took goaltender Frolov. They had the 49th overall pick and took center Serato. And they had the 62nd overall pick and took center Rybikin. Now, Rybikin's already signed his ELC. Looks like eventually could be a solid second, third line center. Same thing with Serato, maybe more of a third line center, but still looks like he's going to be a really solid NHL level player in due time, and Frolov might eventually be the Canes goalie of the future. So some very interesting picks here in the 2025 draft with their first 3 picks of that draft, but they had 3 second round picks, 41st, 49th, and 62nd, and they took 2 centers and a goaltender, so very interesting note there. Next, I went over to my offseason checklist from my offseason preview video when I looked and said there are 5 things I said this Canes team should do in the offseason to get better and improve for next year. The first thing I said this team should do was to add a superstar winger. They did that. They added Nikolai Ehlers. Now, I'm not sure if a lot of you guys will put him in the superstar category, but he's going to be a really solid top 6 addition there for that Carolina Hurricanes team. He's going to be able to put them up like 60 to 70 points, like 25 to 30 goals. He showed last year he can be a really solid force in the postseason, so I think that's a really solid pickup and really took down my top priority for them this offseason, which was to add a superstar winger. They did that. So that's a check mark on the first part of my checklist. The second part of my checklist was to add 1 to 2 top 4 defensemen, and they did that to some extent. Like, I think it would have been a lot better had they added a second top 4 defenseman, but Keandre Miller is going to really fill in well in a top 4 role. He can play like behind Jacob Slavin, be a solid second pair defenseman. He can be a guy who can put you up like 35 to 40 points, be more of a defensive minded guy, be a really solid puck mover there for the Carolina Hurricanes. So like, I really like that addition. That completes the second part of my checklist. The third part of my checklist was to give younger guys, potentially guys like Unger Sorum, Suzuki, Nikishin, and Morrow before he got traded, opportunities at the NHL level this upcoming season. I do believe Nikishin for sure will have some NHL opportunities. On the forward group, guys like Unger Sorum, Suzuki, I think Nadeau, as well as Gunler will all have opportunities to be, I think, solid bomb 6 forwards. I think at least 1 or 2 of them will be able to make it. So very interesting note there, but the Carolina Hurricanes definitely do have a couple of spots open for some of the younger players. That's a check off my checklist too. The fourth thing I said this team should do is to add some bigger body bottom six forwards, some people who could really round out the bottom six. They did lack size in that Eastern Conference final against Florida, so I was hoping they would be able to get some forwards with toughness to fill the bottom six. They didn't do that. Ehlers was their only offensive addition, while I do think that's a really solid addition. They didn't add any bottom six help, so that's an X on my checklist. And the fifth thing it says team should was to consider trading Jesperi Kotkaniemi, just because it doesn't seem to be working out in Carolina. They haven't done that, at least at this point in time. As of recording this video, Kotkaniemi is still signed with the Carolina Hurricanes, so we shall see what happens with Carolina and Kotkaniemi, but at this current point in time, he's still on the team, so that's another X on my checklist. So very interesting note there. But the Carolina Hurricanes did complete 3 of my 5 things that I said this team should do in the offseason, including adding a superstar winger in Nikolai Ehlers. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my projected lineup for the Carolina Hurricanes for 2025-2026 season. So at this current point in time, my projected lineup looks like this. I have Ehlers playing on the top line with Aho and Jarvis, Svechnikov, Kotkaniemi, Stankoven on the second unit, Hall, Stahl, and Blake on the third unit, Carrier with Martinook and Gunler on the fourth unit. I have Slavin and Chatfield being pair 1, Miller and Gostisbehere being pair 2, and Nikishin and Walker being pair 3, Anderson the starter, Kochikov the backup, and Robinson, Jankowski, and Riley being the 3 spares. And that will be a really solid roster for the Hurricanes. Like, they're deep in the forward group, defensively still have one of the better defenses in the entire NHL. Goaltending might be a little bit lacking, but I think Anderson and Kochekov can definitely hold it throughout the regular season, so very interesting note there. But that's a pretty solid lineup there in my opinion for the Carolina Hurricanes. So that's my projected lineup for them. Next, going over to my predictions for the Carolina Hurricanes for 2025-2026 season. I have them taking another major step forward. I think the addition of Ehlers, Miller, they're going to be invaluable adds. I think the Metro as a whole really got a little bit worse this offseason. I think the Canes in general got a whole bunch better. I have them being one of the President's Trophy favorites. I have them finishing with a record of 55, 22, and 5 for 115 points, and by far winning the Metro division. That is how much confidence I have in Carolina. I think I have them being, 10, 12 points ahead of the next closest team in the Metro. Like, I think the Carolina Hurricanes are not only going to win the Metro, they are going to destroy the Metro. And I think they're going to be one of the Stanley Cup favorites going into this season. So, very interesting note there with my current predictions for the Hurricanes. Has them having 55 wins, 115 points, and being the best team by far in the Metro division. And lastly, going over to my offseason grade. So at this current point in time, I think the Hurricanes had a really solid offseason. The Ehlers edition, the Miller edition, they did lose a little bit of depth on the blue line, but I think they really did well replacing it. I'm going to give them a B+ rating. I think they had a pretty solid offseason. Had they been able to replace a little bit of their depth, maybe get a bottom 6 forward, I might have been able to let them up to an A level rating. But at this point in time, I think a B+ is warranted for the sort of offseason that the Carolina Hurricanes team had this past offseason. So definitely, that's my opinion on the Hurricanes, opinion on the Caps. I'd love to get your thoughts. What do you think about these two teams? Is Carolina poised to win the Metro Division again? Is Washington poised to take a major step back, potentially miss the playoffs? Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? How do you think they did this past offseason? And how do you think they're going to do going into the 25-26 season? I'd love to get your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to offer today. Remember to like this video, and for those remember to subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. I'll link to the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.